Well, good morning, everyone. Kate and Fiona here, joining you this week for our Facebook Live, where we thought we'd really talk about negotiating salary and confidence. And I think this is one that's really timely. Fee, I always say if 30 June or 1 July is kind of the pay rise time, you always want to be having the conversation, 90 days out when budgets are happening and all of those sorts of things. But let's talk a little bit around actually leaning into those conversations, actually asking for what you want when it comes to salary, which is, of course, one of our big acts of confidence.
Yes. What we know is if you're working in corporate Australia right now, you're almost certainly underpaid by at least $10,000. And this is kind of where the gender pay gap starts. We're not having those conversations. We probably haven't had them over the last X number of years of our career. And so cumulatively, we now know, and the latest data that came out said we're at least 26 years away from having anything like gender equity in terms of pay in the workplace. So there's a big cost to not asking for what you want and not getting clear about how it is to present that conversation and really have a good quality conversation about what you're worth to the organisation and how to get that salary that you deserve.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things in terms of contexting your initial comment. At least 1 in 2 women I talk to are underpaid by, I'd say, at least $20,000 or more. Now, that's contexted with the type of women we talk with regularly, white-collar professional women working. And the next layer of evidence is, and when I look at the salary increases, we either negotiate with women in roles or the level of salary increase women get when they move roles and we negotiate salary on the way in. Those sorts of numbers, $10, $20, $30,000 are things that we are seeing all the time. They're the sorts of jumps that women are getting when they're going new into roles. So I think this is a really important one. Of course, the data the research we did back in 2018 said that at least 1 in 2 women felt they're underpaid by 10% or more. And of those, at least half hadn't had conversations. So I think there's no question. And I think the last 12 months, most people weren't leaning into negotiating salary through COVID, and totally understandably. I think things are shifting. We are, interestingly, depending on the industry you're in a talent short space, purely because we don't have skilled migrants coming in to Australia. So there's some really interesting, in certain industries, things going on in terms of demand and supply of labour that inherently is pushing up salaries. But I think it's a really interesting time for us to be circling around this, for us to be noticing, if you are someone who feels that you're undervalued, underpaid, if you are someone who isn't leaning into the conversation, to notice what's going on for you as to why these conversations feel so hard.
And this is the kicker. These conversations generally are hard, and we know that, and that's not a reason to shy away from them. So I think one of the things is to prepare yourself for the fact that this is going to be a negotiation. It's going to be uncomfortable to some degree. Some of the reasons we shy away from it, we're worried about getting a no. We're worried about that, we won't get what we want. And so it seems easier not to do anything at all. We're also concerned about how will we perceive? Will we be perceived as someone who's a bit grasping or greedy? And, that's not helpful to think of it in that way, because if you are speaking up for what you're worth and you're leaning into that conversation, that's valuable for you. It's also valuable for the organisation, and it's actually valuable for women generally. The more we can talk about what we're worth and what we deserve in the workplace, it actually elevates this conversation to be had more broadly. The other one I think we see a lot, Kate, is people being loyal, and particularly, when you've been through something, as disruptive as COVID was last year, and, people are feeling grateful. I had a job, I had work, I should stick around for that, or I should do this. And again, just to question and notice, is that misplaced loyalty? Am I being overly concerned about that rather than actually honouring where I'm at in my career and what I'm worth and what I should be asking for in order for that to be in good exchange?
Yeah, I think the loyalty in many situations it can be founded as well, particularly through COVID. So we're not saying disregard that and don't be loyal, but I think there's a really important conversation that women inherently put money and financial reward at the bottom of the list. Partly because it's uncomfortable to have. We don't talk about salary with people in our world. So, as in a room when I'm talking about this stuff, who knows what their best friend earns, and less than 1 in 10 hands go up. We don't talk about this in our social circles. It's difficult to talk about it in our professional circles as well. And so there's this secrecy that surrounds it that makes it really hard, perhaps sometimes, to get some good intel and some advice around this stuff. But I think bringing it higher up on the ladder and recognizing if that is you, if you are someone who feels that you're, under rewarded or underpaid, then now is the time to have the conversation. It doesn't mean you're going to get what you want. Doesn't mean you're going to get a yes. But the conversation, to your point, the conversation is really important. That it's about activating the conversation. It maybe not now. It may be, in 6 months' time. It might be a conversation that leads to a conversation around promotions, but at least that we're in there and having the dialogue and really standing up for who we are, the value we contribute, and the problems we solve, and so that we are in that really good exchange. If you're not going to do it, who else will? Number one. And if no one does it, then the gender pay gap will stay. There is no question. It's not going to right size it all on its own. And it's not the only way that we can do that, but part of us starting to close the gender pay gap is starting to encourage and empower women to lean into these, yes, very hard and difficult conversations, to start more dialogue in the system. And ultimately, again, you're not going to get a win in every situation, but I know from all the clients I've worked with in this space, that changes it for them, but it changes it for everybody else in the system they're operating in.
Yes. And so this notion that you have power, that you actually have agency here, that it is up to you, and you have, and when you feel resourced and when you feel capable to have these conversations, even if they are tricky, even if they are a bit difficult, you'll still advance your message, and you will get maybe no now, but you might get something in the future that will mean, oh, okay, it's worth starting that conversation. And I think the other thing we'd counsel here is don't just jump in. Don't just, go in without preparation, without understanding how to present this well, how to create the business case. So it's easier for people to say yes when they see the value you're bringing, when they see what you offer. That's something that you can do some work on, and then you'll feel really strong, anchored, empowered in the way that you engage in that dialogue. So the more prepared you can be, the easier it will be to have the conversation and to start to disrupt the system a little bit if there is in your organisation, that lingering gender pay gap and all that goes with it.
Yeah, so now is definitely the time to be leaning in, both from a time of year with regards to budgets and financial year end, if your organisation operates that way. I'd even encourage you, regardless, it's a good time to think about it. With where things are at with COVID, it's a good time. Talent market, depending on your industry. But I think, notice if for you, inherently just listening to this has you go, oh no, I couldn't do that. It's time to shine a light on what's going on for you. It's time to get some help, no question, to your point, Fee. And on that note, if you do want some support around this or any other areas of how do you, really aim and confidently ask for what you want, reach out, connect with us, share a comment below, or find us on coreconfidence.com.au and look at how you can take your relationship with confidence even further. So thanks, guys. Have a great week, and we will see you next week.